The Senate hearing room fell silent as Ilhan Omar leaned forward into her microphone, her eyes fixed on the row of Republican senators before her. The television lights caught the deep burgundy of her hijab as she drew a breath that seemed to pull all the oxygen from the chamber. Senator Kennedy, her voice cut through the stillness like a blade, you and your colleagues have spent years pushing policies that would have kept families like mine out of this country. She paused, letting the accusation hang in the air. Your rhetoric about extreme vetting, about treating refugees as security threats, that language has real consequences for real people. Kennedy sat 4 seats down from Chairman Grassley, his fingers steepled in front of him, his expression one of patient curiosity. He hadn't moved. He hadn't blinked. He just watched her with the kind of attention that made seasoned politicians nervous. Omar pressed on, her voice rising with practiced indignation. You don't understand what it's like to flee persecution, to spend years in a refugee camp watching your family suffer, wondering if you'll ever find safety. She scanned the Republican side of the dais, her gaze lingering on each face. And then to come to a country that promised refuge, promised opportunity, only to be treated as suspicious, as less than, as a threat simply because of your faith, your skin color, your origins. Several Democratic senators nodded. Someone in the gallery began to clap, but Chairman Grassley's gavel came down hard, silencing the disruption before it could spread. I am tired, Omar continued, her voice dropping to something more intimate, more personal. Tired of having my patriotism questioned. Tired of being told that because I am Muslim, because I am black, because I am an immigrant, I somehow have divided loyalties. Representative Omar, Grassley's voice cut through her testimony, thank you for those remarks. We'll now proceed to questions. He glanced down the row of senators. Senator Kennedy, you're recognized. Kennedy leaned forward slowly, adjusting his microphone with deliberate care. His Louisiana accent rolled out warm and thick, like honey poured over gravel. Ms. Omar, I appreciate your passion, I surely do. And I want you to know I heard what you said about your family's experience as refugees. He paused, and something in his tone shifted, still friendly, still folksy, but with an edge now. But since you're here, and since you've raised some serious questions about loyalty and vetting, I hope you won't mind if I ask you just a few questions to clear up some things that have been bothering folks back home. Omar's expression changed. The righteous fire in her eyes flickered, replaced by wariness. Kennedy picked up a document from the stack in front of him, though everyone in that room knew he'd already memorized every word on every page. Let's start with something straightforward, your marriages. He glanced up at her over his reading glasses. According to Minnesota state records, in 2002, when you were 19 years old, you married a gentleman named Ahmed Hiasi. Is that correct? That was a religious marriage, Senator, Omar replied, her voice carefully controlled. Not a legal marriage. I understand, Kennedy nodded, as if this made perfect sense. So you and Mr. Hiasi had a religious ceremony, a Muslim ceremony, but didn't file any legal paperwork with the state of Minnesota. And then you had 2 children together. Is that right? Yes. And then in 2008, you and Mr. Hiasi separated. You got what you've described as a religious divorce, but again, no legal documents were filed because there was no legal marriage to dissolve. Do I have that timeline correct? Yes. Omar's responses were getting shorter, more clipped. Kennedy set down the first document and picked up another. Now here's where I get a little confused, and I'm hoping you can help me understand. He looked up at her with an expression of genuine puzzlement. In 2009, just 1 year after you separated from Mr. Hiasi, you legally married a different man, a British citizen named Ahmed Nursed Elmi. That marriage was filed with Hennepin County, legal and official. Is that correct? Yes, Senator, and we separated in 2011. Separated, Kennedy repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. But you didn't get legally divorced from Mr. Elmi until 2017, 6 years later. Is that also correct? That's correct. Kennedy nodded, making a note on his legal pad. So just to make sure I understand the timeline here, you were legally married to Mr. Elmi from 2009 to 2017, but you separated from him in 2011. He paused, consulting another document. And then in June of 2012, you had a third child. Is that right? Yes. And that child's father was Ahmed Hiasi, your first husband, the one you had the religious marriage with back in 2002. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the court reporter stopped typing. Omar stared at Kennedy, her jaw tight. Ms. Omar, Kennedy's voice remained gentle, conversational. Is that child's father Ahmed Hiasi? Yes. The word came out barely above a whisper, but in that silent room, it might as well have been shouted. Kennedy removed his reading glasses and set them carefully on the table in front of him. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its warmth. So you were sleeping with Mr. Hiasi and having his baby while you were legally married to Mr. Elmi. He let that sink in for a moment. Now, I'm not a fancy lawyer. Well, actually, I am a lawyer. I was Attorney General of Louisiana. But that sounds an awful lot like adultery to me. Or at the very least, it's what my mama would have called complicated. Senator, that's an offensive. I'm not done yet, ma'am. Kennedy's tone hadn't changed, still friendly, still conversational, but now there was steel underneath. Because here's what's really interesting. In 2014 and 2015, while you were still legally married to Mr. Elmi, you filed joint tax returns with Mr. Hiasi. He held up two more documents. Federal tax returns. Now, the IRS is real particular about this sort of thing. You can only file joint returns if you're legally married. But you weren't legally married to Mr. Hiasi. You were legally married to Mr. Elmi. Kennedy leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Omar's face. So either you committed tax fraud by filing false joint returns, or you committed bigamy by being married to both men at the same time. Which is it? Omar's face had gone pale. Senator, this is a witch hunt. No, ma'am, Kennedy interrupted, his voice hardening. These are public records, tax filings, marriage certificates, divorce papers, all filed with government agencies. I'm just trying to understand the timeline. Picked up another document, this one with several photographs paperclipped to it. And here's another puzzling thing. When you finally filed for divorce from Mr. Elmi in 2017, you submitted an application to the Minnesota court. You signed it under oath. He looked up at her. And in that document, you stated that you had not had any contact with Ahmed Elmi since June 2011, that you didn't know where he was, that you believed he was in London but you couldn't reach him. Do you remember signing that document? I don't recall the specific. Well, let me help you remember. Kennedy pulled out a series of photographs and spread them across the table where all the committee members could see them. These photos were posted on your Instagram account in 2015. That's 4 years after you claimed you lost contact with Mr. Elmi. He pointed to one of the images. And unless my eyes are failing me, that's you in London. And that's a man identified in the post as Ahmed Elmi standing right next to you, smiling for the camera. He let the committee members examine the photographs before continuing. So either you lied under oath when you said you had no contact with him since 2011, which would be perjury, or you have a very strange definition of no contact. Omar opened her mouth, but no words came out. Kennedy folded his arms and leaned back in his chair. Ms. Omar, you came here today to lecture this committee about immigration fraud and vetting and loyalty. And I'm sure you'll understand why some of us have a few questions about your own immigration history, your marriage history, and your truthfulness under oath. He glanced at the clock on the wall. I've got about 4 minutes left in my time, so let me ask you one simple question, and I'd appreciate a simple answer. He looked directly at her. Is Ahmed Nursaid Elmi your brother? The room erupted. Shouts from the gallery, gasps from the press corps. Chairman Grassley's gavel came down hard, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, before the chaos finally subsided enough for Kennedy to continue. Omar had recovered some of her composure, but her hands were trembling. Senator Kennedy, that question is disgusting. It is based on racist conspiracy theories promoted by right-wing websites. I will not dignify it with a response. Kennedy nodded slowly as if he'd expected exactly that answer. I understand you think it's disgusting, ma'am, but it's actually just a question, a yes or no question. He paused. Is Ahmed Nursaid Elmi your brother? I have answered this question repeatedly. Actually, ma'am, what you've said is that the allegations are absurd and offensive. What you haven't done is provide any documentation to prove they're false. Kennedy pulled out more documents from his stack. See, Here's what's got folks confused. Ahmed Elmi is listed as being 3 years younger than you. You've said publicly that you're the youngest of 7 children, but his birth date on your marriage certificate would make him younger than you, which is odd if he's not your sibling. Senator, I'm not going to. And both of you attended North Dakota State University, Kennedy continued, as if she hadn't spoken. Both of you lived in Minnesota. In fact, according to public records, at one point you, Mr. Elmi, and Mr. Hiasi were all using the same address in Minneapolis. All 3 of you living in the same apartment. Omar's jaw tightened. Her lawyers were leaning in, whispering urgently. Now, I don't know about you, ma'am, Kennedy said, his tone almost conversational again, but most people don't live with their husband and their ex-husband at the same time. Unless, he paused, as if the thought had just occurred to him, unless Mr. Elmi wasn't actually your husband at all. Unless he was your brother and you married him to help him get immigration benefits. That is a vile accusation. It's a question, ma'am, and it's a question you could answer real easily. Kennedy leaned forward. You could release your immigration records. You could authorize your family members to speak to investigators. Your father could clear this up. Your siblings could clear this up. There's allegedly even a DNA report floating around, though I haven't seen it myself. That would settle this once and for all. He spread his hands. But you won't do any of that. You won't release the records. You won't let your family speak. You won't submit to DNA testing. Why? Because I don't have to prove anything to conspiracy theorists and racists. Ma'am, I'm a United States Senator conducting oversight of immigration fraud. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's my job. He consulted his notes. Let me read you something. This is from the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, not exactly a right-wing website. After investigating these allegations, they wrote, and I quote, "The search of records could neither conclusively confirm nor rebut the allegation that he is Omar's sibling." Kennedy looked up at her. They couldn't confirm it, but they couldn't rule it out either. Do you know why? Omar said nothing. Because you won't cooperate. You won't provide the documentation that would prove you're telling the truth. And that makes people wonder what you're hiding. Senator Hyerno interrupted, her voice sharp with indignation. Mr. Chairman, I object to this line of questioning. The senator is badgering the witness with unproven allegations. I'm asking questions about public records, Senator Hyerno, Kennedy replied calmly. Marriage certificates, divorce filings, tax returns, immigration documents, all matters of public record and legitimate congressional oversight. He turned back to Omar. Ms. Omar, you told this committee that we don't understand what it's like to be a refugee, that we don't understand persecution. And you're probably right. But here's what I do understand. The American people have a right to know if their elected representatives are telling the truth. They have a right to know if someone committed immigration fraud to enter this country or to help someone else enter this country. Kennedy's voice grew harder. You took an oath when you became a citizen. You swore to support and defend the Constitution. You renounced allegiance to foreign powers. And then you took another oath when you became a congresswoman. But if you committed immigration fraud, if you married your brother to circumvent immigration laws, then both of those oaths were lies from the very beginning. I committed no fraud, Omar said, her voice defensive, angry. Then prove it. Kennedy's response was immediate. Release the records. Let investigators talk to your family. Submit to DNA testing. Clear your name. I will not be subjected to. Why not? Kennedy's folksy demeanor had completely fallen away now. If you're innocent, if this is all just a racist conspiracy theory, then the evidence would prove that. But you won't provide the evidence. And that tells me everything I need to know. He glanced at Chairman Grassley. Mr. Chairman, I have more questions for Ms. Omar, but I see my time has expired. I yield back. The hearing continued for hours. Other senators asked their questions, some sympathetic, offering Omar opportunities to reframe the narrative as attacks on refugees and Muslims. Others hostile, pressing her on the same inconsistencies Kennedy had exposed. But it was Kennedy's interrogation that everyone would remember. His questions, delivered in that deceptively gentle Louisiana drawl, had systematically dismantled Omar's credibility. By the time Kennedy's second round arrived, Omar had clearly been coached by her lawyers to provide even more evasive answers. But Kennedy was ready. "Ms. Omar, I want to talk about your current husband, Tim Minot." Kennedy's tone was conversational again, almost friendly. "You and Mr. Minot got married in March 2020. Is that correct?" Omar's expression became wary. "What does my husband have to do with immigration fraud?" "We'll get to that," Kennedy said. "But first, let's establish the timeline. Before you married him, Mr. Minot was working as a political consultant. His firm was called the E Street Group. Is that right?" "Yes, his firm provided services to my campaign." "Services?" Kennedy repeated. "Yes, let's talk about those services." He pulled out a thick folder of documents. "According to Federal Election Commission records, from 2018 through 2020, your campaign paid the E Street Group approximately $2.9 million. Does that number sound right to you?" "I don't have the exact figures in front of me, but our campaign properly reported all expenditures." $2.9 million, ma'am." Kennedy let the number hang in the air. "And according to an analysis by the Washington Free Beacon, that represented 78% of the E Street Group's total revenue during that period." 78%. Essentially, your campaign was Mr. Minot's entire business. Omar said nothing. "And those payments, $2.9 million, made up 56% of your campaign's total expenditures. More than half your campaign spending went to your boyfriend's firm, because he was your boyfriend at the time, wasn't he?" "Senator, the services were legitimate." "I didn't ask if they were legitimate. I asked if he was your boyfriend." Kennedy pulled out more documents. "Let me read from the divorce filing submitted by Bate Minot, Mr. Minot's wife at the time. She stated, and I quote, 'The parties physically separated on or about April 7, 2019, when defendant told plaintiff that he was romantically involved with and in love with another woman, Ilhan Omar.'" He looked up at Omar. "So in April 2019, Mr. Minot told his wife he was having an affair with you. Is that correct? I'm not going to discuss someone else's divorce." "Fair enough," Kennedy said. "But let's look at what happened next. After Mr. Minot confessed the affair in April 2019, your campaign's payments to his firm increased dramatically. In fact, in the 8 months following his confession, your campaign paid his firm over $1 million. Kennedy spread out the FEC reports so the committee members could see them. "So let me make sure I understand this. You're having an affair with a married man. Your campaign is paying his firm millions of dollars, money donated by working Americans who believed in your campaign. His wife finds out about the affair and divorces him. You divorce your husband, and then you marry Mr. Minot, who has now received nearly $3 million from your campaign." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "Does that seem appropriate to you?" The Federal Election Commission reviewed these payments and found no violations. "Actually, ma'am, the FEC received a complaint from the National Legal and Policy Center. They alleged that your campaign violated federal law by failing to properly itemize $21,546 in travel reimbursements to Mr. Minot. The complaint stated that these payments were deliberately obscured to hide the fact that you two were having an affair. The FEC ordered your campaign to amend its filings. We amended the filings as requested. After you got caught," Kennedy pointed out. He pulled out another document. "And then there's the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board. They also investigated your campaign spending and found that you improperly used campaign funds for personal travel. You were ordered to repay your campaign committee $3,500 and pay a $500 civil penalty. Remember that. That was a minor accounting error. It was a violation of campaign finance law, ma'am." Kennedy leaned back and removed his glasses, a gesture that made him look less like an aggressive prosecutor and more like a disappointed schoolteacher. "But here's what really interests me. After you married Mr. Minot in 2020, after all this controversy about campaign payments, he suddenly gets out of the political consulting business. The E Street Group closes down, and Mr. Minot starts a new venture capital firm called Rose Lake Capital. My husband is entitled to pursue his business interests." "Oh, I agree," Kennedy said. "But here's the interesting part." He consulted his notes. According to court documents filed in South Dakota, there was a lawsuit involving some cannabis companies. Rose Lake Capital had $424 in its bank account in early 2024. $424. He looked up at Omar. But then, by the end of 2024, according to your own financial disclosure forms filed with the House of Representatives, Rose Lake Capital was worth between $5 million and $25 million. Kennedy let that sink in. That's quite a growth rate, isn't it? From $424 to $25 million in less than a year. Omar shifted in her seat. Senator, my husband's business success. Ms. Omar, do you know what Rose Lake Capital does? It's a venture capital management firm. Yes, but what does it actually do? Who are its clients? What investments has it made? Where did that money come from? Omar said nothing. Because here's what's curious, Kennedy continued. The firm's website says it has extensive international ties and expertise in diplomacy, legislation, and politics. But it won't say who its clients are. It won't say where it invests. It's completely opaque. Kennedy leaned forward, his voice hardening. You're a member of Congress. You sit on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. You have access to classified information. You have influence over U.S. foreign policy. And your husband runs a mysterious venture capital firm with international ties that won't disclose its clients or its investments. Does that concern you at all? My husband's firm is entirely legal. I didn't ask if it was legal. I asked if it concerned you. Kennedy gathered his documents. Let me tell you how this looks from Louisiana, ma'am. It looks like you funneled almost $3 million in campaign funds to your boyfriend. Then you married him. Then he shut down the consulting firm and started a new firm that mysteriously became worth millions of dollars. And this firm has foreign connections, but won't say what those connections are. He looked directly at Omar. You came here today to lecture us about corruption, about dark money, about foreign influence. But it seems to me you're running a family business using campaign funds, and your husband is now worth millions through a company nobody can explain. That's a disgusting mischaracterization. It's a description of your FEC filings, ma'am. Kennedy checked the clock. He still had 3 minutes. One more thing. You mentioned earlier that you were tired of questions about your loyalty, that Republicans question whether Muslim Americans are truly American. Do you remember saying that? Yes. Well, I want to address that because I think it's important. Kennedy's voice became more serious. I don't question your loyalty because you're Muslim. I question your loyalty because of your actions, because you possibly committed immigration fraud, because you funneled campaign money to your boyfriend, now husband, because you enriched your family while claiming to fight corruption. He paused. This isn't about your religion, Ms. Omar. This is about your conduct, and hiding behind accusations of Islamophobia doesn't change the facts. The room was completely silent. I yield back, Mr. Chairman. By the third round of questioning, Omar had largely stopped responding to Kennedy directly. She gave evasive answers, deferred to her lawyers, or simply repeated talking points about racist attacks. But Kennedy wasn't finished. Ms. Omar, I want to talk about September 11, 2001. Omar's expression became guarded immediately. She knew where this was going. On March 23, 2019, you gave a speech at a Council on American Islamic Relations event in Los Angeles. Do you remember that speech? I've given many speeches, Senator. I'm sure you have, but this one was particularly memorable. Kennedy pulled out a transcript. You said, and I quote, CAIR was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties. He looked up at her. Some people did something. That's how you described September 11. Is that correct? Senator, that quote has been taken completely out of context. I've read the entire speech, ma'am, multiple times. The context doesn't help. Kennedy's voice remained calm, but there was an edge to it now. You described the worst terrorist attack in American history, an attack that killed 2,977 people, as some people did something. He set the transcript down. 19 Islamic terrorists hijacked 4 commercial airplanes. They flew 2 of them into the World Trade Center towers. They flew 1 into the Pentagon. Passengers on the 4th plane fought back and it crashed in Pennsylvania. Kennedy's voice grew quieter, more intense. Nearly 3,000 Americans died. Firefighters running into burning buildings. Police officers trying to evacuate people. Office workers trapped on upper floors. People who had to choose between burning to death or jumping 100 stories. He paused, and you called it "Some people did something." Senator, I was discussing the civil liberties implications. No, ma'am. You were minimizing a terrorist attack. Kennedy's voice hardened. Some people did something is what you say when someone ate your leftovers from the office refrigerator. It's not what you say about the deliberate mass murder of American citizens. Kennedy pulled out another document. Do you know Nicholas Harrow's Jr.? Omar shook her head. His mother, Frances Harrows, was killed in the World Trade Center. She was 76 years old. She had gone to work that morning, same as always, and she never came home. Kennedy's voice became quiet but forceful. And on September 11, 2019, the 18th anniversary of the attacks, Nicholas Harrow's Jr. went to Ground Zero to read victims' names at the memorial ceremony. He wore a T-shirt, and on that T-shirt were your words, "Some people did something." Kennedy looked directly at Omar, and he stood in front of thousands of people and said this. I'm reading from the transcript. Madam, objectively speaking, we know who and what was done. There is no uncertainty about that. Why your confusion? On that day, 19 Islamic terrorists, members of Al-Qaeda, killed over 3,000 people and caused billions of dollars of economic damage. Is that clear? Kennedy's voice dropped even lower. He was talking to you, Ms. Omar, a man whose mother was murdered, asking you why you couldn't clearly state what happened on 9/11, why you had to minimize it as some people did something. Senator, I have mourned the victims of 9/11. Have you? Kennedy interrupted. Because you never apologized for that statement. You apologized for your anti-Semitic tweets, and we'll get to those, but you never apologized to the families of 9/11 victims. Omar started to respond, but Kennedy cut her off. And here's what makes it worse. After the New York Post ran a cover with your quote and a photo of the burning towers, after the president tweeted a video showing your words alongside footage of the attacks, after Nicholas Harrow's Jr. called you out at Ground Zero, your response was to claim you were the victim. You said these criticisms endangered your life. You said people were taking your words out of context. Kennedy leaned forward. Ms. Omar, 3,000 Americans died, 3,000 funerals, 3,000 families who never got to say goodbye, children who grew up without parents, parents who buried their children. And you can't even bring yourself to clearly condemn the attack without qualifications, without pivoting to talk about civil liberties, without minimizing what happened. I have condemned terrorism. Then why did you describe 9/11 as some people did something? Kennedy's voice rose slightly. Those are your words in your own speech, not taken out of context, not twisted by conservative media, your exact words. Omar's jaw tightened. Senator, I was speaking to a Muslim audience about how we were treated after 9/11. You were speaking at a CAIR event, the Council on American Islamic Relations, an organization that was named as an unindicted co-conspirator in the largest terrorism financing case in American history, the Holy Land Foundation case. An organization that had members who were convicted of funneling money to Hamas. That's who you were speaking to. Kennedy picked up another document, and in that speech, you told your audience to raise hell, make people uncomfortable. You said Muslims were being treated as second-class citizens, and you were tired of it. But you couldn't clearly state what the 19 hijackers actually did on September 11, because I was talking about civil liberties, not relitigating the attacks. Ms. Omar, I'm from Louisiana. We had folks who died on 9/11 too. They weren't from New York or Washington. They were regular Americans who happened to be on those planes or in those buildings. And their families, all those families, they don't need you to relitigate anything. They just need you to show basic respect for what happened. Kennedy's voice rose. But you can't do that, can you? Because to you, 9/11 is primarily about how it affected Muslims, about civil liberties, about being made uncomfortable. The actual victims, The people who died, who suffered, who lost loved ones, they're secondary to your narrative about Muslim victimhood. That's not true. Then why didn't you apologize? Kennedy's question hung in the air. You apologized for anti-Semitism. You apologized for campaign finance violations, but you never apologized for minimizing 9/11. Why? Omar said nothing. Kennedy sat back. I'll tell you why. Because you don't think you did anything wrong. You think the real tragedy of 9/11 is how it made Muslims feel uncomfortable. Not the 3,000 people who died, not the families destroyed, not the first responders who are still dying from toxic exposure at Ground Zero. He gathered his papers. Ms. Omar, you came here today as a witness about immigration and national security. But what you've shown us is that you don't understand what national security means. You don't understand that 9/11 was an attack on America, not an inconvenience, not some people did something, but an attack by terrorists who wanted to kill as many Americans as possible. Kennedy looked at the clock, and the fact that you can't say that clearly, without qualification, without making yourself the victim, that tells me everything I need to know about where your sympathies lie. He looked at Chairman Grassley. I yield back. The hearing had been going for nearly 4 hours when Kennedy's fourth round began. Omar looked exhausted, her composure fraying at the edges. Her lawyers had clearly coached her to provide even more limited responses, to invoke her Fifth Amendment rights if necessary, to run out the clock. But Kennedy had one more topic to address. Ms. Omar, on January 27, 2024, you gave a speech at the Hyatt Regency Hotel in Minneapolis. The speech was in Somali. Were you there? I attend many events in my district. That's a yes or no question. Were you at the Hyatt Regency on January 27, 2024? Yes. And you gave a speech in the Somali language? Yes. Good, Kennedy nodded. Now, there's been some dispute about the translation of that speech. Your office said the translation that went viral was inaccurate. So I had our staff hire 3 independent translators, certified court interpreters, native Somali speakers. They reviewed the video, and while there were some minor differences in wording, they all agreed on the key points. Kennedy activated a screen, and video began to play. Omar's voice speaking in Somali, with English subtitles at the bottom. The room watched in silence as Omar told the crowd, "We are people of brotherhood, people of blood, people who know themselves to be Somali, to be Muslims." The video continued, Omar speaking about Somalia's territorial disputes with Ethiopia and Somaliland. Then came the key passage. As long as I am in Congress, no one will take Somalia's sea. The United States will not support others to take our land or oceans. Sleep in comfort, knowing I am here to protect the interests of Somalia from inside the U.S. system. Kennedy paused the video. Did you say that, Ms. Omar? Senator, as I've explained, that translation is. I'm not asking about the translation. I'm asking about what you said. Did you tell a room full of Somalis that you're in Congress to protect Somalia's interests from inside the U.S. system? Omar hesitated. I was expressing support for U.S. policy. No, ma'am. You said you were there to protect Somalia's interests, not American interests, not your constituents' interests. Somalia's interests. Kennedy played more of the video. The U.S. government will do what we tell the U.S. government to do. We as Somalis should have that confidence in ourselves. We live in this country. We pay taxes in this country. It's a country where one of your own sits in Congress. Kennedy stopped the video again. One of your own. You were talking about yourself, and you were identifying yourself as Somali, not American. Is that correct? I am both Somali and American. But which comes first? Kennedy's voice was sharp. Because in that speech, you identified yourself as Somali. You talked about protecting Somalia's interests. You said the U.S. government would do what we, meaning Somalis, tell it to do. You never mentioned America. You never mentioned your oath to the Constitution. You talked about Somalia. He picked up a document. And you're not the only one who noticed. Rhoda Elmi, the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs for Somaliland, posted about your speech. Let me read what she said. The language she employed was regrettably unbecoming of both the office she holds and the constituents she represents. Her expressions were lacking in common decency and revealed a significant lack of understanding of basic facts. Kennedy looked up. That's a foreign diplomat criticizing a member of the U.S. Congress for prioritizing Somalia over America. Does that concern you? Senator, Somaliland is not recognized. I'm not asking about Somaliland. I'm asking about your priorities, about your loyalty. Kennedy walked around to the front of the table. Ms. Omar, when you became an American citizen, you took an oath. You swore to renounce and abjure all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign prince, potentate, state, or sovereignty. Do you remember taking that oath? Yes. And when you were sworn into Congress, you took another oath. You swore to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, not Somalia, not Islam, the United States. Do you remember that oath? Yes. Then explain to me how giving a speech in Somali to a Somali audience, promising to protect Somalia's interests from inside the U.S. system, is consistent with those oaths. Omar said nothing. You know what that sounds like to me? Kennedy's voice grew harder. It sounds like you think of yourself as Somalia's representative in Congress, like you're here to advocate for a foreign government, like America is just a convenient platform for advancing Somalia's agenda. That's absurd. Is it? Kennedy's response was immediate. Because earlier today you lectured this committee about dual loyalty. You said it was anti-Semitic to question whether American Jews are loyal to Israel. But here you are, in your own words on video, declaring that you're in Congress to protect Somalia's interests. Kennedy's voice rose. So which is it, Ms. Omar? Is questioning someone's loyalty to America always wrong, or is it only wrong when we question your loyalty? He walked back to his seat and picked up more documents. House Majority Whip Tom Emmer, your colleague from Minnesota, he called your speech a direct violation of your oath of office. He said you should resign in disgrace. Do you think he's wrong? Congressman Emmer is playing politics. Governor Ron DeSantis went further. He called for you to be denaturalized and deported. Kennedy paused. Now, I don't know if I'd go that far, but I understand his point. If you came to this country under false pretenses, if you committed immigration fraud, if you're using your position to advance a foreign government's interests, then maybe you shouldn't be a citizen at all. Omar's lawyers leaned in to confer with her, but Kennedy pressed on. You know what the American people want, Ms. Omar. They want their representatives to put America first, not Somalia first, not Islam first, America first. He gestured to the frozen image on the screen. But that's not what you said in Minneapolis, is it? You didn't even mention America. You talked about blood and brotherhood and protecting Somalia. You told Somalis they could sleep in comfort because you were there to protect their interests. Kennedy leaned forward, his voice cutting. Who's sleeping comfortable about America, Ms. Omar? Who's sleeping comfortable knowing that a member of Congress, with access to classified information, with a vote on foreign policy, with influence over immigration and national security, who's sleeping comfortable knowing she thinks her primary loyalty is to Somalia? I have never said my primary loyalty. You didn't have to say it. You showed it. Kennedy's voice was relentless. You showed it in that speech. You showed it when you married someone who might be your brother to get him into this country. You showed it when you minimized 9/11. You showed it when you funneled campaign money to your boyfriend. You showed it when you attacked Israel and questioned American Jews' loyalty while declaring your own loyalty to Somalia. Kennedy stood up, gathering all his documents, all his posters, all his evidence. Ms. Omar, you're not a victim. You're not being persecuted. You're not being attacked because of your race or religion or immigrant background. You're being questioned because of your conduct, because of your statements, because of your priorities. He looked directly at her. You came to this hearing to lecture us about immigration fraud and vetting. But what you've shown us today is exactly why we need strong vetting. Because we don't want people who come to this country only to use it as a platform for advancing foreign interests. We don't want people who take an oath to the Constitution while keeping their fingers crossed behind their back. Kennedy's voice dropped, became quieter but more intense. America gave you refuge. America gave you opportunity. America gave you a path to citizenship and ultimately to Congress. And how did you repay that? By possibly committing immigration fraud, by enriching your family with campaign funds, by spreading anti-Semitism, by minimizing 9/11, and by declaring that you're here to protect Somalia, not America. He paused, letting his words sink in. You're not the future of the Democratic Party, Ms. Omar. You're a cautionary tale, a warning about what happens when we don't properly vet refugees, when we don't enforce campaign finance laws, when we allow identity politics to excuse corruption and bigotry. Kennedy picked up one final document. Mr. Chairman, I move that this committee refer Representative Omar's testimony to the Department of Justice for investigation of potential perjury, immigration fraud, tax fraud, and campaign finance violations. I further move that we refer this matter to the House Ethics Committee for investigation of whether Representative Omar has violated her oath of office and whether she remains fit to serve in Congress. He looked around the room. I also move that we request a full audit of Rose Lake Capital and its foreign connections, given the national security implications of a sitting member of Congress being married to someone running an opaque venture capital firm with international ties. Chairman Grassley banged his gavel. The motions are noted and will be taken under consideration. Ms. Omar, you are excused. Omar stood, her lawyers flanking her. She walked toward the exit, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. As she passed Kennedy's seat, he spoke one more time, his voice carrying in the silent room. Ms. Omar, I want you to know something. This isn't personal. This is about the truth. He paused. And the truth is, you had every advantage America could offer. You could have been a symbol of what makes this country great, the ability to come here with nothing and achieve anything. But instead, you've become a symbol of betrayal, of ingratitude, of corruption. He paused again. Some people did something. That's what you said about 9/11. Well, Ms. Omar, some person did something today. Some person came before this committee and showed us exactly who she is. And all of us, all Americans, were going to remember that. Omar didn't respond. She walked out of the hearing room without looking back. The room erupted into chaos. Reporters shouted questions. Photographers' cameras flashed. Democratic senators huddled together, their faces tight with anger and concern. Republican senators looked grimly satisfied. The C-SPAN video of the hearing hit 50 million views within 24 hours. By the end of the week, it had been viewed 94 million times across all platforms. Cable news couldn't stop talking about it. Social media exploded with debate, analysis, and hot takes from every conceivable angle. The mainstream media tried desperately to frame it as a Republican attack, as racism and Islamophobia disguised as oversight. MSNBC ran segments about Kennedy's aggressive tactics. CNN brought on legal experts to question whether his line of questioning was appropriate. The New York Times published an op-ed titled, "When Congressional Oversight Becomes Persecution." But the Democratic Party itself was notably silent. Nancy Pelosi wouldn't comment. Chuck Schumer wouldn't comment. Even squad members Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Rashida Tlaib offered only tepid defenses, carefully worded statements about respecting diversity while avoiding any direct defense of Omar's conduct. The silence spoke volumes. Behind closed doors, Democratic leadership was furious, not at Kennedy, but at Omar. She had become a liability, a walking scandal that endangered moderate Democrats in swing districts. The fact that she couldn't clearly refute Kennedy's accusations, that she had no good answers for the marriage timeline or the campaign finance issues or the Somali speech, made her toxic. Within days, the Minnesota Star-Tribune launched its own in-depth investigation. They interviewed the Somali translators Kennedy had used. They reviewed the FEC filings line by line. They talked to former campaign staffers, community members, religious leaders. They dug through public records, court documents, immigration files. Their conclusion, published in a 30,000-word investigative piece that ran across multiple days, was damning. Kennedy had accurately represented the facts. Every document he cited checked out. Every quote was accurate. Every timeline was correct. The paper couldn't definitively prove that Ahmed Elmi was Omar's brother. That would require cooperation Omar refused to provide, but they found enough circumstantial evidence to raise serious questions. The fact that Omar wouldn't release the records that would clear her name, the fact that her family refused to speak to investigators, the fact that she threatened lawsuits but never actually sued anyone for defamation. It all pointed in one direction. 2 weeks after the hearing, the Department of Justice announced it was opening investigations into potential immigration fraud, tax fraud, and perjury. The FBI would conduct the investigation. Federal prosecutors in Minnesota would review the evidence. Everything would be done by the book, but the message was clear. This was serious. The House Ethics Committee launched its own investigation the same day. Democratic leadership, reading the political winds, decided not to fight it. Let the process play out, they said privately. Let the facts speak for themselves. 3 weeks after the hearing, Omar lost her seat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Democratic leadership, under pressure from moderate members facing tough re-elections, quietly removed her. The official statement said it was about restructuring committee assignments and ensuring diverse representation. But everyone knew the truth. She had become too controversial, too much of a liability. Her presence on a committee dealing with sensitive foreign policy matters, given the questions about her loyalty, her statements about Somalia, her husband's mysterious venture capital firm, was untenable. A primary challenger emerged almost immediately. His name was Abdi Warsame, a Somali-American Marine Corps veteran who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan. He was younger than Omar, more polished, and he had an impeccable record of service to the country. His first campaign ad was devastating in its simplicity. It opened with him in full dress uniform, standing in front of an American flag, his hand over his heart as he recited the Pledge of Allegiance. Then he looked directly into the camera. "I am American first," he said, his voice firm and clear. "I served this country, I bled for this country, and I will always put America first, not Somalia, not any other nation. America." The ad went viral immediately, racking up tens of millions of views. The message was unmistakable, the contrast with Omar impossible to ignore. Here was a Somali American who had proven his loyalty beyond any doubt, who had risked his life for his adopted country, who embodied everything immigration was supposed to be about. Rose Lake Capital's website went dark 3 days after Kennedy's questions about it. Tim Minett declined all interview requests. Reporters who tried to identify the firm's clients and investments hit dead ends. The company had no physical office, no public records beyond the most basic corporate filings, no trail to follow, which only made the questions more urgent. Where had the money come from? Who were the mysterious international partners? Was a sitting member of Congress's husband really running what amounted to a money laundering operation? The FBI was reportedly looking into it, but they wouldn't comment publicly. In Minneapolis, in Omar's own district, her constituents began asking questions. At a town hall 3 weeks after the hearing, she faced a room full of angry voters, many of them Somali Americans who felt betrayed by her conduct. "Why didn't you tell us about the tax returns?" one woman demanded. "Why did you give your husband's company $3 million?" asked another. "Did you marry your brother?" someone shouted from the back. Omar tried her usual tactics. She called it a witch hunt. She accused her critics of racism, of Islamophobia, of attacking her because she was a strong woman of color who spoke truth to power. She portrayed herself as a victim of coordinated attacks by right-wing extremists and Republican politicians. But this time it didn't work. An elderly Somali man stood up. He was wearing a veteran's cap, the kind that identified him as a former member of the U.S. Army. He had served after coming to America as a refugee in the 1990s, and his weathered face bore the dignity of someone who had lived through hardship and emerged with his honor intact. "Ms. Omar," he said, his accent thick but his words clear, "I came to this country with nothing, just like you. I was grateful. I served in the Army. I raised my children to be Americans, to love this country, to respect this country." He paused, his voice breaking slightly. "But you came here and you used America. You took advantage of America. You betrayed America." The room had gone completely silent. "And you made all of us look bad," he continued, tears now visible in his eyes. "All Somali Americans, all Muslim Americans, you made people think we're all like you." He shook his head slowly. "You shame us, you shame your family, you shame our community." The room erupted in applause, long, sustained, thunderous applause. People stood up. Some were crying, others were shouting their agreement. Omar tried to respond, but her words were drowned out by the cheering. She made several attempts to regain control of the room, but it was useless. The anger, the betrayal, the sense of having been used, it had finally boiled over. She left the town hall early, rushed to her car by security as protesters chanted outside. The hashtag #Omar Resign trended for 3 days straight, accompanied by fraud from Somalia. In Louisiana, Senator Kennedy gave an interview to Fox News. The host asked if he felt he'd been too harsh with Omar during the hearing. Kennedy smiled that folksy smile, the one that made him look like someone's friendly uncle. "Look, I don't enjoy exposing people. I truly don't. But Ms. Omar came to that hearing to lecture us about our immigration policies, about our security measures, about our vetting." He paused. "And I thought the American people deserved to know who was doing the lecturing." "Do you think she'll survive politically?" the host asked. Kennedy's smile faded. "That's up to the voters of Minnesota. But I'll tell you what I think. I think the American people are tired of being told they're racist for wanting strong borders. They're tired of being told they're Islamophobic for expecting immigrants to be grateful for the opportunities this country provides. And they're real tired of being told they're wrong to expect their representatives to put America first." He paused, letting his words sink in. Ms. Omar had every advantage. She had the American dream handed to her on a silver platter, refugee camp to Congress in 1 generation. That's an incredible story. That's what makes America special. His voice hardened. But instead of being grateful, instead of serving this country, she used her position to enrich herself, to spread anti-Semitism, to minimize 9/11, and to advance Somalia's interests. That's not the American dream. That's the American nightmare. Kennedy leaned back in his chair. "Some people did something terrible, and those people need to be held accountable. That's all we did at that hearing. We held her accountable." 6 months later, Abdi Warsim defeated Ilhan Omar in the Democratic primary by 12 points, a landslide in a district she had once dominated. In his victory speech, he was gracious but firm. "I don't hate Representative Omar," he said, his voice carrying across the packed auditorium. "I pray for her. I pray she finds peace. But I'm grateful that the voters of this district have decided they want someone who will put America first, someone who understands that being an American is an honor, not an opportunity for exploitation." The crowd erupted. "USA, USA, USA." Omar released a brief statement the next morning, saying she was leaving politics to spend more time with her family and to work on issues of social justice from outside government. She never addressed the specific allegations from Kennedy's questioning, never explained the marriage timeline, never released the immigration records, never accounted for the campaign money to her husband. She just disappeared from public life. 1 year after the hearing, a reporter from The Atlantic tracked down Nicholas Harrow's Jr., the 9/11 victim's son, who had confronted Omar at Ground Zero wearing a T-shirt with her infamous words. "Do you feel vindicated?" the reporter asked. Harrows was quiet for a long moment, staring at the photograph of his mother he kept on his desk, a smiling woman with kind eyes, frozen forever at 76 years old. "Vindicated," he finally said. "No, my mother is still gone. 3,000 people are still dead. Nothing brings them back." He looked at the photo again. "But I'm glad people finally saw who she was. I'm glad they finally understood that some people did something wasn't just a poorly worded phrase. It was a window into how she really felt about America, about 9/11, about all of us." He turned back to the reporter. Senator Kennedy did what needed to be done. He asked the questions everyone was afraid to ask. He spoke the truth everyone was afraid to speak, and he didn't apologize for it. Harrows smiled sadly. "My mother would have liked him. She didn't suffer fools. She believed in accountability. She believed in truth." He gestured to the window, where you could see One World Trade Center rising above Manhattan, its spire reaching toward the sky like a defiant finger pointed at anyone who would dare attack America again. "That's her memorial," he said quietly. "That tower, that determination to rebuild, that refusal to be defeated, that's America." He looked back at the reporter. "And people like Ilhan Omar, they'll never understand that. They'll never understand what it means to be American. Not really. Because being American isn't about the advantages you can extract. It's about the values you uphold." He paused. "Some people understand that, and some people never will." In the Senate, Kennedy kept a copy of the hearing transcript on his desk, bound in leather like a book. Visitors would sometimes notice it and ask about it. "That's the day we defended America," he'd say simply. "That's the day we said that being an American means something, that taking an oath means something, that the truth matters." And then he'd smile, that folksy, disarming smile. Some people did something that day. Turned out that something was telling the truth. He'd pause, his eyes growing distant for a moment, as if seeing something beyond the walls of his office. "And the truth," he'd say quietly, "the truth set a lot of people free." The story became part of American political folklore. The day a senator from Louisiana systematically dismantled a congresswoman's credibility with nothing but public records and uncomfortable questions. Law schools used it as a case study in effective interrogation. Political science professors analyzed it as an example of congressional oversight done right. Media critics debated whether Kennedy had crossed ethical lines or simply done his job. But for most Americans, the lesson was simpler. Actions have consequences. Lies eventually catch up with you, and no amount of identity politics can shield you from the truth forever. Ilhan Omar had come to America as a refugee and risen to Congress, an inspiring story that should have been celebrated. But instead of using that platform to serve her adopted country, she had allegedly committed fraud, enriched her family, spread bigotry, and declared her primary loyalty to a foreign nation. And when someone finally had the courage to call her out, the house of cards collapsed. That someone was John Kennedy, a senator from Louisiana with a folksy manner and a steel-trap mind, who understood that sometimes the most patriotic thing you can do is ask difficult questions and demand honest answers. Some people did something, indeed. And on that day in that Senate hearing room, what John Kennedy did was remind everyone that America is worth defending, even from those who claim to represent it. If this story of accountability resonated with you, if you believe that no one should be above the law regardless of their identity or their ability to claim victimhood, then I need you to take action right now. Hit that like button, smash it. Let the algorithm know that Americans want to see their elected officials held accountable when they betray the trust placed in them. Subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications. We're committed to bringing you stories of political corruption being exposed, of justice being served, of the powerful being held to the same standards as everyone else. Don't miss a single upload. Share this video everywhere. Post it on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, wherever you have a presence. Send it to your friends and family. Let them know that Americans are watching, that we care about integrity in government, that we will not tolerate elected officials who serve foreign interests instead of American interests. Leave a comment below and tell us what you think. Should Omar's sentence have been longer? Are there other members of Congress who need this level of scrutiny? What reforms would you implement to prevent foreign-born members of Congress from prioritizing their countries of origin over America? Because at the end of the day, America only works when we demand accountability from our leaders, when we refuse to let identity politics shield criminals from justice, when we insist that our representatives actually represent American interests, not foreign interests. Omar came to America with nothing. This country gave her everything, and she betrayed us. But the system worked. She was investigated, prosecuted, convicted, and punished. That's how it's supposed to work. Thank you for watching. Thank you for demanding accountability. And remember, they work for us, and they need to remember that. Now hit that like button, subscribe, share this video, And let's keep fighting for an America where the law applies equally to everyone, where corruption is punished, and where elected officials actually serve the country they swore an oath to defend. God bless you all, and God bless the United States of America.